Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Andres, and sorry for the appearance, but I just woke up, and the reason I'm making this video is because I just had this thought in my mind yesterday night that I just couldn't keep out, that I was just sitting in and I was just questioning, and I don't really have an answer. Maybe I'll have an answer at least for what I prefer at the end of the video, but what I was thinking about is essentially is, does it matter more for a book to have a strong start or to have a strong end? Now, I feel like there's a lot of books that either begin really well, they're really engaging, the world seems interesting, and then they just kind of peter out by the end, they lose steam, and the ending is not satisfying. And conversely, there's other books where the start, there's a lot of setup, it's kind of confusing, you're being overwhelmed with a lot of things, but then by the end, you are fully hooked. Maybe some crazy ending happens that sets up the next book, or there's some insane action scenes or some twists happen where like the foot's on the pedal and we're going at 200 miles per hour and we're not stopping for the last like 100 pages. I feel like that tends to happen a lot in the books I read. I've noticed that trend. And I honestly, the first thing is, I don't know if authors do that on purpose, or if it's just kind of like an unintentional thing, whether like authors are better at writing one way or the other, where they just feel like in the beginning they're just letting all their ideas out and then they're trying to make sense of it and just trying to just giving a structure as we go along. But yeah, I just wanted to discuss 5 books that I read in the past few months. And the final one I'm going to talk about is the reason I'm making this video in the first place. I'm not going to spoil it, although you'll probably know by the 4th book because it's the 2nd book in that series. But yeah, now the first book I want to talk about is Red Rising, the first one. I'm going to talk about the Red Rising trilogy. Yeah, so this one, it's interesting for me because I did not find it that engaging in the first like 100 pages. I just felt like the world itself didn't seem that interesting. The setup with our main character Darrow and his wife and what happens is good, but it's nothing I've never seen before. But then as the story goes along, and then we move on to the latter parts of the book where it kind of becomes like Hunger Games, I found it much more engaging. The new characters being introduced, I got invested with them. I started finding out what kind of people they are. And then by the ending has such a cool setup that really hypes you up for Golden Sun, the 2nd book in the series. And I would say in this case, with this book, I forgave the kind of slow start because it was the setup for the whole story, and the start is very different from like the bulk of the book after like the first 100 pages or so. It just changes entirely. And then moving on to Golden Sun, the 2nd book in the series, I feel like the same thing happened again. The first 150 pages of this book, I was not that into it. I felt that it wasn't what the first book was, and maybe it was just me trying to like acclimate to how the stark difference between like just maybe even genre of the series. First book is very YA, it's set up with like young, like I guess like teens and stuff, and this becomes more like space opera, like rebellion, Star Wars story kind of, although way more messed up and with many twists and turns. But yeah, this one though, by the 150 page mark, it just blasts off and it does not let go. Like, this book is insane. And then the ending again in this one is so strong because we're just left with this twist and these shocking turn of events where you're just like, no, I have to see what happens because I want to know if the characters that I love, like who's okay and who isn't after what happens. So yeah, I mean, in this case also, like I think I forgave the slow start in the book because the rest of the book just goes off completely. And the start, don't get me wrong, it's not like bad. It's just set up because we've moved like a year or two in the future, and we're just trying to ground ourselves into the reality of Daryl's character and everyone and where he's at now. So it makes sense, and it doesn't take too long to really delve into the actual story that Pierce Brown's trying to tell with this book. But then Morningstar is a bit different in my opinion, because Morningstar, the first 150 pages were my favorite, I think, in the whole book. The setup for where Darrow is just crazy, and you just don't know what's going on, and it's on purpose at this time, where you're just thinking about, God, who made it? Who made it after the second book? Who's okay? Who isn't? And just the writing itself, the insecurities Darrow is facing now after the traumas he's like. Now he has time to sit because of the situation he's at, and he has to think about what's been actually happening in the last years that the book is set in. And yeah, I mean, it's such a great start. It's so exciting. But then a lot of people, I feel like they don't really, it doesn't seem like they like the ending as much. And I think it's because it has a pretty conclusive ending. I like the ending. I thought it was nice to have a conclusive ending to the story, but still leave enough to obviously set up for the next books. But if you stopped at this point, you would be okay. You wouldn't be left like, with that feeling that you need to scratch that itch and keep on going. So I would say this one has a strong start. The middle kind of sags. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like this. This is my favorite one out of the three books. And I wonder if it has to do with the fact that from the beginning, I was just fully hooked. I just loved it. And in the middle, okay, maybe it sags a little, but you're still like riding that high from the first 100, 200 pages. And yeah, and then the ending picks back up again, compared to the other two books where, in my opinion, yeah, the Red Rising and Golden Sun, the beginning, you are slowly building up to the craziness. Now let's move on to another series that I've been reading now. And the first book I want to talk about is Empire of Silence, right? The first book in the Suneater series. I'm going to talk about this one, and then I'm going to talk about Howling Dark, which is the reason I'm making this video in the first place, because I just finished Howling Dark, and I have a lot to say about that book. But starting with Empire of Silence, this book, I would say, has a similar pacing. It's not like a lot of people compare Red Rising and Suneater. They're very different. This is much more slower paced, and much more like lore and world focused, whereas Red Rising is much more character focused. The characters are shine in Red Rising. This, not so much, but it has other strengths that Red Rising doesn't. But yeah, this book, though, has a similar structure, at least for me, where the first 100, 150 pages were very slow. I was not enjoying it that much. I was very confused by a lot of the terminology thrown at me. And I wasn't sure if I was going to enjoy it by the end. But Hadrian, the main character, we see his journey as he's a teen, and we go to like the different locations and places, and it gets more interesting as it goes along. And again, just like Red Rising and Golden Sun, by the end, the setup for the next book is really good, and it got me really invested. I'm like, okay, I really want to know what's going to happen with Hadrian and the mysteries of this world. But yeah, I could say this took me longer to get invested in compared to Red Rising and Golden Sun. This took me probably, I don't know, maybe even up to half of the book, where I was like, okay, I'm kind of into it now, and I'm interested to see what's going on. And that's because we start learning more about the world and the lore, and these alien races and civilizations. So I started to get hooked because of that. And now finally, I want to talk about Howling Dark, which is the second book in the Suneater series. I don't have a physical copy. I read most of my books in ebook format. But yeah, I felt very conflicted with Howling Dark. And I think this is another thing that plays into it, expectations coming in. So the Red Rising trilogy, the original trilogy, gets talked about a lot. People love it online. I get so many TikToks about people living through their experience, and I feel like the expectations of what I thought the series was were matched with what I read and what I've read so far coming in. Meaning that it's fast paced. Even if it has slow starts, in my opinion, in the first book and then the second one, it is very fast paced, a very character driven, very interesting. With Empire of Silence and the Suneater series, I was told that the first book is the worst one, and that the second book, it just goes off. And like, I've seen so many of my favorite content creators on YouTube, they give it 5 stars. And every time now that I've read the second book, I went and watched like the spoiler reviews, and I feel like every time I hear people talk about Howling Dark, they're talking about the ending and the last third of the book. They don't really talk about that first third of the book. And I think it's on purpose, because the first third of the book, for me personally, out of all these books I mentioned, is by far the worst. And I think it's because of expectations coming out of the first book and the setup of the first book. At the end of the first book, we're left with this goal to get to this mysterious place and find and learn more about these mysterious alien races, and establish contact with them as like humans. And that's a really cool setup. So coming into the second book, I'm like, okay, starting from the second book, my expectation is I'll start reading and it'll start from like, oh, we're in the journey to get there. But now the second book it has a very jarring start. It's fast forward in time. A lot of stuff has happened in between the first and the second book. And a lot of that stuff doesn't matter, at least in my opinion. I don't really find it particularly interesting, because again, what I find interesting about Suneater and it's the world and the lore and the civilizations and races, etc. Right? So coming in, I found out there's like these many more characters than there was in the first book, and we're kind of just stuck, and we're not going and moving in this journey, and I want to move in this journey, right? There's this expectation being set from the first book, and I'm like, man, I just want to get to where we're going because it sounds so cool and so interesting, and there's like folk tales about this mysterious place, right? But instead, we're having melodrama and just drama overall about like the crew and should we keep going or not. And it's like, man, I just do not care. I almost DNF'd the book. And yeah, this is the whole reason why I'm making this video, because it really stuck out with me, because by the end, I could see why people love this book. I really do. But I just can't forgive the sins of the first third, because the first third to me was so slow paced, so frustrating. I just wanted to, and then by the other thing is, right, this is around 700-page book, so 1/3 of it is what, like 250, maybe 225 pages. So yeah, that's a whole ass book, at least in my opinion, like that you're reading, right? That's like a novella that you're reading that it to me doesn't add much. I don't really care much about a lot of these characters that are being introduced. I don't really care about where we are right now. This book has a really strong finish, but again, I've been burned once already, right? Coming out of the first book, which has a slow start and then has a really strong finish with great setup. Coming into the second book, it just drops down right in the beginning, and then by the end, I'm fully hooked in even more than the first book, and the setup is fantastic with where we're going next, right? But then I'm like, okay, am I gonna be like deceived again? I hope I'm not deceived again if I go into Demon in White, the third book, and then again it's like just slow, and I'm just baffled by what's going on, and I don't really care too much about the characters. Like, I just hope that's not the case. And I just have that in my head now coming in to the third book. I will keep on reading the Sun Eater series, but I really hope it just is always at this level from this point forward. And like in the end, with a lot of like books having like really strong starts and strong finishes, I think the key difference is, I think it does matter more to have a strong finish because that sticks with people more than having a strong start. But if your book does not have a strong start, you're probably going to get more DNFs from people that are just not willing to go in this journey. And that almost happened to me with Howling Dark. And by the end, again, it has stuck with me. I'm definitely going to be thinking about the ending of Howling Dark and its themes and its like antagonist is so interesting, and the alien race interaction and the technologies and the weirdness of it. It's going to stick with me. But yeah, I mean, there was a moment there where I thought I wouldn't make it, and I thought maybe I should just move on to another series that I might enjoy more. So I would say it's a gamble overall. If you're like front loading a lot of info to the reader, or throwing in like many new characters and like completely new setup and changing, or like sagging on like the goal that we have that you set up in the last book, you might run into issues with people, just dropping the book. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.